R&D tax credits can be difficult to understand at the best of times, but add grant funding into the pot, and it can be very confusing and in many cases very costly if they're not understood and treated correctly. So what this presentation is, it's just to help you try and understand the relationship between R&D tax credits and grant funding. So I'll just try and address the main issues with it. I won't go into too much detail with the specifics of each individual type of grant, but I'll just give you an overview of how those grants can interact with grant funding with R&D tax credits. So can we claim R&D tax credits? Well, with grants, well, the answer is obviously yes. How will the grant affect your claim? And I'll give you some example illustrations, and then we'll talk about the funding strategy. So can we claim R&D with grants? Well, yes, you can. But what you have to ensure is that the R&D claim is treated under the correct HMRC scheme. So there is RDEC, which is the Research and Development Expenditure Credit, or a combination of the RDEC with the SME scheme combined. So the RDEC is for large companies or for when a company is already claiming state aid. It is just worth over 10 pence for every pound of R&D expenditure. SME is for small companies and is worth up to 33 pence for every pound spent. However, this means that as the SME is so generous, it is already classed as state aid, so restrictions apply when a company is awarded a grant as well. So how does the grant affect your claim? It depends. So is it notified state aid or not, and is it project specific? So notified state aid would be an innovation grant, for example, issued by the UK government, such as Innovate UK. Non-state aid grants are either de minimis, where the value is below €200,000 over a 3-year period, or EU grants such as Horizon 2020, and that also includes the lapsed FP7 and FP6 schemes, which some companies are still receiving funding for. So both those would be classed as non-state aid. So for state aid, it's crucial to determine if the grant is project specific, as this can have a huge impact on the value of the claim. This gives us 3 scenarios. We've got non-project specific state aid, project specific state aid, and then de minimis and other non-state aid such as EU and Horizon 2020. So an example of how a non-project specific state aid works. So what you have is 2 areas. One is projects that are not to do with the grant funded project in itself, but are just R&D projects that you're working on. So then in this instance, you're awarded £25,000. You agree as part of that package to put £25,000 in, but it's not classed as a project on its own. It's the money is given to the company to do R&D work. So it would be effectively for probably a company with one project or one product where it is just working on that particular project, and any other work that R&D that may occur, like in this instance 50,000, happens on its own anyway. So what happens is that all of that work, the £100,000 of R&D expenditure, is classed as the whole expenditure is classed as notified state aid. So in this instance, it would have to be claimed as under the RDEC rules at 13% less your corporation tax, which means it's just over 10 pence in the pound, and you'd end up with £10,530. So it's not something to dismiss, but it's something to be aware of, that it would be a low value claim even though you spent £50,000 not on that project. So the next one would be, well, okay, what if we make it project specific? Well, this will be, you make sure that in the grant itself, that the wording is such that it means that this is for a particular project and the fund is for that project only. So effectively what you are doing is ring fencing that project from all the other costs in the company. This is where you need to have accurate records, etc., just to make sure that when you present the spending at the end of the year and you ask for the matched funding, that whoever is providing the grant can see that it was only for that project and nothing else. So in this instance, that £50,000 is claimed under the RDEC rules, and that would be £5,265. But the £50,000 that you spent on other projects is now eligible for SME, so that can be up to 33%, which would be in this instance 16,500. And look at that, it's doubled the value of the previous amount. So it's well worth making sure that you ring fence the grant funded project, even when it's notified state aid. So the final scenario is where it's de minimis or other non-state aid, like the EU Horizon 2020. So in this instance, we've still got the R&D projects funded by yourself, so at £50,000. There's the grant funded £25,000, but your funding of that project as well goes into the SME column. So what you have is a total of £75,000 now. So effectively what happens is the grant funding is the only funding for all the expenditure that is classed as RDEC. So it's ring fenced. That small part of the actual £25,000 is all that comes under the RDEC rule. So now the RDEC claim has gone down, but of course this means that the SME value jumps up. So we're now at £27,383. So what that illustrates is how much of a difference it makes in making sure that you get obviously the expert advice, but it also means that before you apply for the grant, that you make sure that you negotiate exactly what it is that you want and what you're going to get. So in this instance, make sure that you at least get it project specific. If it's notified state aid, get it specifically for one project, or if you have the option to apply for de minimis aid or EU aid, even better, because then at least you're aware that you can still claim the other costs under SME. Now, some companies I know have actually been incorrectly advised on this, and they've still claimed everything under the RDEC rule. So it's thousands. We're talking, as you can see, and that's just small values. The companies that I've been talking about, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds of erroneous claims. So it's really important that this is understood correctly. So as we're saying is, get expert advice, and obviously visit Vantage R&D, and we'll talk you through it and see how we can help. Thank you.